brilliant, ginormous, incredible effort to score this for 90 musicians, according to Rachel, was pretty easy. There's a great video on YouTube with Pete and Rachel talking about this. So, I'd also like to say that it is coming out on vinyl. This is a vinyl edition. And for all of you that don't have a vinyl record player, don't buy an iWatch, just invest in a vinyl record player. So they'll be with us tonight for some good conversation, and with us tonight also is Alan Light, one of today's best music journalists. His recent book is Let's Go Crazy, about Prince and the making of Purple Rain. And his last book, which I highly recommend, is about Leonard Cohen's brilliant song, Hallelujah. It's a whole book about a single song.
Wow.
So, without further ado, let's welcome Alan Light, Pete Townshed, and Rachel.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out. You work out the photos among yourself. So thanks for coming out. What we're going to do, we're going to talk for a little bit up here, and then we're going to have time to take a few questions from you guys. The request is, let's keep the questions to this project, please, and not go through your memories of first seeing Pete at the Fillmore or whatever it is that you want to talk about. This is not the forum. We'll talk about the classic Quadrophenia project. If you have those questions, think about them while we're up here. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Rachel, for joining us. And I guess to let's start at the beginning of this curious project. Tell me, Pete, where does this actually begin? What's the start of going to make a classical Quadrophenia record?
Well, first, thanks, Alan, for taking the chair. Alan and I spent part of the afternoon together this afternoon talking for Mojo magazine about songwriting, and it was great. It was really good to do that and to talk about how many different kinds of songwriting there are, really, and how many different kinds of making music. And so, really, with something like Quadrophenia, I think originally it had a function, which was not to save the Who. We were in perfectly good shape. We were filling stadiums, and we were all relatively fit then. We may have been going a bit crazy in our heads, but we were okay. But one thing that had happened, which was that we lost contact, an emotional connection with our audience. And our audience that were important to us at the time were not an American audience at all. We were able to take our American audience very much for granted, in a sense. They were always there. They'd been with us in a kind of a halcyon zenith of wonderment, which was we arrived with Monterey, we went on to Woodstock, we had Tommy, and so it all exploded very, very quickly. And also with the coming of the Electric Factory, with the Boston Tea Party, the Fillmores, there was a whole new way in America of listening to music, sitting down, approaching it intelligently. We had intelligent music criticism, but the Who, as a band, were lost. And I wrote Quadrophenia just to try to rescue the Who. Where we are, and it worked. It did reconnect us with our audience, I think. Today, Quadrophenia has not only outlasted the Who, but it's changed the function. It's become a piece which, as a piece of music, stands alone. It doesn't seem to need the mod background anymore. It doesn't even really seem to need the Who to be associated with it exactly. When Roger and I play it, as we did on a long tour a couple of years ago here in the States, we play it as though we're concert performers. We play the music, we're very faithful to the music, and we don't add anything to it, we don't take anything away, we just play it, and it seems to work. And it was probably from that I had the confidence to take this a bit further. But where this started was a very simple thing. You know, I'm getting on in age, and I have mountains of music, paper, lyrics, recordings, but I have no written music. I have never written a song down on music. That's always been done by somebody else. And I looked at my oeuvre, and I thought, well, you know, one of the things is that I've written many stories with music, and I would like these to be written down. And I started with Lifehouse, is how I met Rachel. I started to gather people together. Lifehouse was never finished, so in collecting material for that and getting it down onto paper meant really gathering a whole load of ideas and written stuff and trying to make something. And it came out as a limited edition box called Lifehouse Chronicles. If you've got one, you're very lucky because you'll never see the light again. But one of the things about getting stuff down is that I don't read music, and I can write it, but I'm not very good at it. And here I was, many years later. Rachel came to work on Lifehouse Chronicles with me in 1999. I met her in 96. Funnily enough, we were touring Quadrophenia at the time. And mentioned it in passing, and she said, yeah, I'll have a go at it, and did a few pieces, and it was obvious that she was the right girl for the job. And she then started to make demos for me, and so it was part of an exercise to get it written on paper. I had no conception that this might one day come out as a record or be performed by an orchestra. What I wanted, though, was that if that was ever going to happen at some time in the future, it could happen. It could happen one day when all the rock guitarists are gone and all of the iPads have been burned up by the neutron bomb. There would still be a few really good Jewish violin players who could read the score and perform this piece of music live in the concentration camp. And well, let's hope not. I'm stretching into the future here. And whatever happens, in other words, the orchestra, the violin, these instruments will prevail. They don't need the kind of technology that we're so used to today, which is really essential for the Who to perform. We go out with 16 trucks. So that's it, really. I wanted it on paper. Rachel, explain how it went from
that was going to be the question, Rachel.
Yeah.
Tell me then, how do you take a record, a rock and roll record, and then go convert it into this, even this sort of a document?
Well, it wasn't something I'd ever done before. I hadn't arranged or orchestrated any rock really. It had all been classical arrangements, Scarlatti, harpsichord sonatas. I'd done a little bit of kind of orchestral composition for some TV, and it really was just a conversation. Pete, it was just in passing. Pete had talked for a while about wanting to create a folio of some of his bigger works, and we were having a conversation one day, and I said, well, you know, I haven't got much on at the moment, so, you know, I'll do it if you like. And so he said, okay, well, let's give it a go. And what was great was that Pete gave me, via iPad, fabulous GarageBand technology, the original recordings of The Who. So I had Keith Moon. I was able to isolate him. I don't know how safe that was, but I did.
Maybe better isolated.
Yeah, and I was able to isolate also John Entwistle and Pete, whether he was playing acoustic or electric, and of course Roger, although the melodic line was fairly easy to replicate. And you know, so I just started doing, I suppose, what I do. And in my mind, in the forefront of my mind was that I wasn't going to use this as an artistic exercise to show the world my fabulous skills. I am a composer as well, but I put that to one side, and I just really wanted to honour the work as it existed, and be very faithful to all the harmonies within the piece, but also the feel and the energy of it. I didn't want to do anything kind of conceptual with it and grandiose, and I just wanted to honour what Pete had already written. And from the beginning, the actual arranging of Quadrophenia was incredibly easy, because I wasn't working with a 3 or a 5 chord pop rock song. It was very orchestral in the way that Pete had written them. There were also inferred solo instruments, you know, the use of horns and violins, and so I think in the whole process, which took a chunk of time because I kept going on holiday, there were maybe 2 or 3 occasions where I really struggled to land orchestrally certain parts of a song, and I'd been privileged enough to go into Hans Zimmer, who's a film composer, had lent me his studio for a couple of weeks, and one of his engineers to make some synth illustrations, if you like, so demos in an orchestral sense. And off the back of that and the experience I had with that, I put together a very simple rig. So throughout the process, you know, weekly, I was able to say to people, this is what I'm working on at the moment, this is the track that I'm working on, what do you think? And he was able to input creatively into the process, and it was a great tool for me, because it meant that there was less likelihood I was going to be standing at a session with a conductor and 90 players, you know, the Royal Philharmonic is there. I don't really like that bit.
So,
you know, so it was, and it was loads of fun to do as well. It was really fun. It was a pleasure to do. It was great. I loved it.
So to both of you, from each perspective, what do you feel like you learned about this piece from looking at it through this lens and this process?
Well, as Rachel was playing me these synthestrations, one of the things that leapt out to me is that I thought that it would make the most wonderful ballet, because it's rhythmic all the way through. It's all rhythm, and orchestral music is often not rhythmic all the time. You know, it takes its time. The tempos change, but this is a very, very powerful and rhythmic orchestral piece, and it would make the most wonderful ballet. And so for a while I was thinking, what would I do if I did ever orchestrate this, or what would ever happen to it if it went to another life? But I never planned to record it. I never really planned. We did do a test recording, and that was more really as a gift to myself. That we just did a recording of 5 songs, and we also did a short concert with the BBC Concert Orchestra, where Jeff Beck pretended to be the singer on the guitar. It was great fun, and that went out on the radio. So we'd already we knew that the music was going to work with real musicians, but I never imagined that we would do an album, because I thought, well, what do we do if we put a classical album together? I would have to be courteous enough to invite Roger to sing it. Roger and I have already done a tour with this. I knew that Roger had already done classical experiments of his own. He did a tour back in '94 with a lot of orchestral stuff, and he had scores for some of the songs from Quadrophenia, and I heard them, and they were wonderful. So I thought, you know, it's a touchy area. I don't want to get to a place where Roger and I are uneasy about this project. You know, my girlfriend, my partner, you know, my buddy here as we recorded this, but I don't really want you to sing it because we're doing it somewhere else in some other lot with different clothes on. And in actual fact, I commissioned Rachel to do this, and she got paid. She says she will do it for love, and I'm sure that's true. But the great thing about having commissioned her to do it is that I did feel it was okay for me to say, you know, I don't like that bit. That rarely happened, but what did happen quite a lot was that there's something about my writing which is about the notes that are left out. For example, for a long time I loved a keyboard player that worked with a Who called John Bundrick. His name was Rabbit. Unfortunately, he's fallen apart mentally, and so we're not working with him at the moment. But one of the things I loved about him was that if I played a chord on the guitar, he would play that chord on the piano and not the one with 10 fingers. We were talking about this today with Alan's son, who's learning the guitar, and I was saying to Alan's son, learn the piano, because as a guitar player, what's important is making sure that the piano player doesn't take your chord of A with maybe A sus4, which is 3 notes, and turn it into, A major 7th with a suspended 9th and an augmented 5th. And Rachel was really good at that, really good at doing what Rabbit used to do. She heard what I'd done and stuck to it. So the tone, the mood, the simplicity of the sound of the music was what came across. That's what I loved about the process. And I was able to hear that from these demos. If she'd have done a piece of paper, and she talks about wrapping it in a ribbon and giving it to me, I would have gone, great, what's it like? I would not have known. So actually having the demos was great.
And for you, Rachel, to get inside these songs and this piece, what surprised you? What did you learn from going through it?
I wasn't particularly familiar with Quadrophenia as an album. I mean, we've been together now for 17 years, a long time now. So I've been to many shows.
You must have been very young. But do go on.
I don't think that's how it goes. So I'd heard songs from Quadrophenia in the context of a live show. So I was familiar with Love Rain and The Real Me and a couple of others. But it was very new to me when I started to orchestrate, which I think worked in my favour. And the thing that was really important for me, and when I've spoken about this in the past, I've described it as codependency, but I don't think it is. It is really comes from my heart, which was that I'm not afraid of Pete. So I wasn't worried that I was going to play something to him and he was going to react badly to it. I didn't fear that. I also didn't fear being fired. He would say, this is shit, you're fired. But I did have a real desire to please him and to make him happy, and that Quadrophenia is one of his best works, if you like. And it wasn't pretentiousness that Pete's desire to have an orchestral version. It was, I think, Pete talks about being a young boy and hearing orchestral music in his head. I wanted to try and put down on paper what Pete would hear in his head if he were to do this himself, if he were able. But he can't read music, so he can't do the dots. So I wanted, in as close a way as possible, I wanted to please him. I wanted to be happy. I wanted him to listen to the orchestral music and feel proud and comfortable, and that this is what he himself would have done. And I really didn't mess about with it much. I made it bigger, louder, if that's possible. It's just amplified. It was Pete's music amplified and in energy. Literally, if you have 90 players, it's bigger than 4.
Alan and I this afternoon had a conversation. Alan asked me a question about, just one question right at the end, and it wasn't apropos of anything here, but we were talking about why in the process of making a perfectly wonderful rock album into a classic album, what is actually really going on. And in fact, it's decoding and recoding. It's not exactly translation. It's close to translation. It could almost be another language. It's a language, the orchestral language is one that goes back 500 years. Rock is 55 years old now. Even if you take it right back to the blues, it's 60, 70, 80 years old. You know, big amplifiers, synthesizers are relatively recent. You know, all of the stuff that we're so used to now is very, very recent. We don't know where it's going to go. But classical orchestras have existed in the form that I spoke of facetiously earlier on. You know, not all violinists are Jewish, it just happens that some of the best ones have been. Yasha Heifetz was probably the best violinist that will ever live, and I love the recordings I've got of him, which is why I mentioned that, but just so you know. But I think that orchestras have been around for a long, long time, and I think they will continue because the repertoire of music that is there is a legacy of 500 to 800 years of extraordinary and innovative and dangerous and audacious composition, you know, from Purcell right the way through to more modern composers today like Steve Reich, and indeed the film composers like Hans Zimmer, who funnily enough also can't read and write music, which is why he uses these big studios, which what Rachel calls synthestration. I think this is Des McAnuff's description, isn't it? Orchestration by synthesizers. But so in a way, for me, this thing was, Rachel's absolutely right. It stopped when I was about 13 years old. I was a young child from the age of about 4 through to about 11. I used to hear orchestras, not rock bands, orchestras. And so in my head all the time, I used to hear music all the time. Very, very beautiful music. And I spent a lot of my life trying to find it. And funnily enough, one of the Who's most famous tracks, Barbara O'Reilly, was me on that journey, trying to play something that I was hearing in my head. And I had an organ rigged up with an arpeggiation noise and a tape machine and some filters, synthesizer filters, and started to play, and I thought, I know this music. I've been hearing it all my life. And when I worked many years later with Ted Hughes, the poet laureate in the UK who wrote the book Iron Man for children, and a great poet, he was kind of like, I don't know whether you have an equivalent in America, but the poet laureate is the poet to the Queen for a period of time. Anyway, he said to me, Pete, that's the music of the spheres. And I thought, well, it may well be the music of the spheres, but you know, I was a kid and that's what I heard. And it's absolutely right that most of the music that Rachel has produced here has very, very closely replicated what I hoped the Who could do, given that kind of machinery. Funnily enough, around the time that we were recording Quadrophenia, we started in late '72. The band were pretty damn good at that. You know, Keith Moon was not good at boom ta boom ta boom ta. He wasn't good at drum loops. He wouldn't have been very good playing behind a rap artist. But many years after his death, I wondered, you know, because I always hated trying to keep up with him on the stage. I thought, what is it about him that I miss most? And what I found that I miss most was he was an orchestral drummer. He took my playing and he took my songs and he accented what needed to be accented. He created explosions of energy where it was appropriate, and when it wasn't appropriate, he pretended to be an idiot and played every drum quietly. On the other hand, we had John Entwistle, who did not play the bass. He did something else. He played, his bass sound was, his playing was incredibly eloquent. I'm talking about, he played the bass when the band started, but his sound unfolded over the years. So around the time of Quadrophenia, he was playing a sound that was full of harmonics, that was rich, and his fingerings were very complex. He hadn't started tapping yet, but he was certainly playing very, very fast. So I was the drummer on guitar, I played the drums. And I was working, and I should mention Roger, because I think Love Rain on Me, not the vocal performance, but the track was recorded before I even started to go into the studio and work with Quadrophenia, with the Who. And so, knowing that I had that song in the bag, I knew that I could finish this story, because it would finish anything. You know, I thought this Love Brain Honey would close a story about anything. But at the end of the recording, I got Roger to go out, and my mission was, I remember saying to him, Roger, I want you to sing this, because I produced the album, I want you to sing this with heart, with passion, sensitively. And he went out and he yelled like a banshee. And I was about to go out and say to him, Roger, I asked you to sing it with passion and sensitivity. And Ron Neverson, the engineer, said, Pete, listen to it first. And we listened to it, and I thought, he's nailed it. He's nailed it. So, in a sense, for me, the Quadrophenia album was already orchestral. We had John Entwistle, who was an orchestrally trained French horn player, playing horn parts. I just really got deeply into synthesizers around the time of the album that preceded it, the Lifehouse album. I knew exactly how to make all the sounds that I wanted to make, orchestral sounds, violins and cellos and horns and God knows what else, oboes. And so it was orchestral already. So in a sense, listening to what Rachel had done, some of it was very faithful to that, but where she had used, certainly, you say you've never done it before, it must be an innate skill, was the sense that it was the right shape, the right depth. It's not correct to say that nothing has been added and nothing has been taken away, because of course it's very, very different. But it's true, I think, it's true.
So one more question from me, and then we'll go to you guys. But Quadrophenia, you've visited and revisited this piece over and over. You toured it, remixed it several times. There was the film, there was the tour back again, concert version. Now this. What is it about this piece and this material that keeps calling you back?
I want to correct you there. I haven't remixed it. I haven't made a film of it. I haven't done a theatre show of it. I've licensed a few of these things, and the thing that I have done is just before we started on this project, is I did what I would call a director's cut. I gathered, and I wanted to write about Quadrophenia. So some of the things that I'm saying now, if you happen to have the director's cut, you will see, because it's in the text. I talk about it. I wanted to celebrate Quadrophenia as a project and demonstrate, in a sense, how the rock system had saved Quadrophenia from being the most unbelievably cumbersome and dodgy music theatre piece. Because if I'd have included all the songs that I could have included had it not been on vinyl, it would have been dreadful. And in fact, it works very, very well because it's such a tour de force. But coming back to it this time, as I said earlier, this was not an attempt to further its little career. It just, somebody from Deutsche Grammophon, in fact the president, Mark Wilkinson, heard the demo recordings that we'd done. He said, we've got a deal. That's how it happened. And he wanted it. And moreover, orchestras want it already. Anybody that leads an orchestra, the musicians in the background, whether or not the classical audiences will want it is another story, but the hope is that orchestras will perform this and that it will become part of the popular repertoire of many theatres around the world. And I think the first guy that showed an interest, it was not the conductor, but the manager of the Atlanta Symphony. And he was saying this will bring new people into the theatre, whether they're young, whether they're old, whether they love classical music already or not. It will bring new people into our concert hall, and it could just save our bacon. Because at the moment, a lot of concert halls and orchestras are struggling to bring in and hold on to a subscription audience that are, believe it, getting old. So all those old people who grew up with Quadrophenia, they don't have to suffer going to Forest Hills. No, seriously. They can put on a nice coat and tie, and they can go to the symphony hall, and they can sit in a comfortable chair, maybe even have a drink in the intermission, if Rachel lets us have an intermission, and have a lovely night out. And hopefully they will get the same message from this music that our audiences have been getting for a long time, which